father, I'm a husband, and I want my daughter to know that she can grow up and that her life is going to be valuable just like everybody else that we grew up with.
We gotta work harder, smarter, harder. We gotta work harder, smarter, harder. Do this for the mamas, fathers, daughters, and the sons. In Sandy Springs, a black man has never won. When it's all said and done, Carter gon' get it done. He might be running for man, but he ain't never run from the problems in the world we tryna overcome. They raising the taxes for lower tax brackets. How that makes sense, man?
Woo, woo, woo. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Hey, I just want to apologize. I want to say it was a technological error with earlier before, but no, it was a human error. There were some clicky clicks that I forgot to click on my screen here, which is why I didn't pop up. So I do apologize. I hadn't gone live for a while, and I'm just like most people struggling to keep up with the fast pacing of fast-paced times of technology. So I do apologize, but I hope y'all are doing well. I wanted to take a minute off with what my campaign manager likes to call making those calls, dialing for dollars. We got an important fundraiser. Well, yeah, fundraising deadline coming up next Wednesday. So, if you haven't gotten a call from me, you probably will be getting one. Just a heads up to everybody. But you know, I wanted to do a follow-up to a story that I had spoke about maybe a week and a half ago, and I wanted to talk about it because it's picking up media buzz again, and this is all in reference to the new ordinance that Sandy Springs passed, majority vote that is that you know targets free speech, and there have been a lot of things that have been brought up, but I think when the ACLU sent their letter to the city, it was pretty clear, and you're seeing many of the media outlets who are also responding because we just have to be honest, right, about the type of city we're building, about the type of city that we want our families to grow up in, that we want our kids to be able to return to. It's important that the people who are elected to represent the people understand that at the core of that leadership has to be service, and we're not seeing that service right now. We're not seeing it by any means, and it's frustrating because I hear a lot about, well, we have a good city council person here, a good city council person there, um, but we're running the city like it's back in the wild wild west. I went down to the High Point homeowners association meeting yesterday. Got a chance to sit down and talk to some really really great folks, and one of the gentlemen said, I started watching some of your stuff, wasn't quite sure what to make of anything, and you had a video talking about the city's budget, and you were outlining it, and you said, "Where's the money going?" And he said, "You caught my attention, stopgap." It was just like boom, wow, where are these, where is it going, what is really happening? It's important that we have these conversations, right? Because they're not being had, and not being had in a place where a majority of the residents of Sandy Springs can hear them. A lot of folks say, well, these municipal races tend to have lower turnout because X, Y, and Z. No, no, no. Listen, you can come up with whatever reason that you want to. The reality is people don't turn out because they're not our candidates aren't having a conversation with them. If you have a conversation with the base, majority of the base, you're going to see a different outcome by a majority. But the problem is we're not having those conversations. And so I wanted to hop in here. Let me see if I can pull this article up real quick. But it was really important that I felt that we had a real conversation, um, really about what was going on, what was said, because it's time, right? It's time. And let me see. And so this is an article that Brendan Keefe from Atlanta News First did as a follow up. And let me see. Let me share my screen really quick. I want to thank y'all for just bearing with me, right? Because I'm always doing something. Always got my hand on something. Um, but you should see it off to my right here, and it's Atlanta News First investigates Sandy Springs free speech restrictions spark concern. And this is something that many of us have been saying for a while, right? We got a lot of questions with how the city's being run. We got a lot of questions with how information from the city is being sent out to the public. Um, I think on the face, right, a lot of things are being hidden. But this is where I think we really have to do a better job, even as a community, of really getting into the weeds of what's going on. And so, again, the article is from the Atlanta News First. Sandy Springs free speech restrictions spark concern. Three ordinances limit First Amendment rights in Sandy Springs. Now, let's be clear. Let's be clear. Let's be very, very clear. This is a violation of the your first constitutional rights, right? Your First Amendment constitutional rights. So, um, an attorney will deal with that sooner or later. I mean, city's been sued so many times. It's crazy how much money we spend just on paying lawyer fees, but that's a whole other topic. But the article says consent is now required if you want to speak your mind in proximity to the public in this metro Atlanta suburb. Again, violation of your First Amendment rights. The Sandy Springs City Council recently passed three new ordinances limiting First Amendment activity, the most controversial of which creates an 8-foot buffer zone between someone wanting to share a message and anyone who doesn't want to hear it. Kenneth D. Simone, chief of the Sandy Springs Police Department, told the city council his officers would now arrest someone for silently walking through a demonstration with the flag of an opposing group. It's on us to prevent chaos, and if you don't help us out, chaos will ensue, D. Simone said during the council's April 1st meeting. Y'all, you hear the dog whistles here. I don't have to tell you what a dog whistle is, but it's laced here. Um, but it says the new ordinances were modeled on legislation proposed um, but the Anti-Defamation League, following anti-Semitic incidents in Sandy Springs since the October 7, 2023 attack by Hamas on Israel and the ongoing war in Gaza, ADL is one of the world's largest organizations opposed to anti-Semitism through the United States. A neo-Nazi group littered my neighborhood's lawns, including my own, with hate-filled leaflets seeking to sow fear into the Jewish community, said Mike Pachinik during public comment. The Sandy Springs resident, a former television reporter, still implored council not to pass the ordinance that would limit printed materials distribution. The ordinance, as written, could preclude legitimate news outlets such as the Sandy Springs Crier from distributing its newspapers in our community, Pachinik said. The first ordinance approved by the city council now makes it illegal for the Sandy Springs Crier to deliver its free newspaper early in the morning. It says the Sandy Springs Crier is published by Appen Media, which has a partnership with Atlanta News First through its Decatur-ish publication. The new ordinance prohibits delivery of uncontracted for literature into residential neighborhoods between the hours of 9 p.m. and 7 p.m. The only council person who voted against it asked specifically what would happen if our newspaper was delivered before 7 a.m., said Carl Lappin, director of content for Appen Media. The city attorney said if someone were to deliver the Sandy Springs Crier, the police would show up and handle it. Like, mm. And again, this is the city council person asking the city attorney if Appen Media puts something at the end of someone's driveway at 6:50 a.m. Someone calls and reports it, then what happens? The city attorney goes on to say the police will come and handle whatever needs to be handled. So now you're seeing the over policing and now criminalization. Now let me backtrack for a second. I don't know if many of you saw it, but I toured the Fulton County Jail last week. I was invited to come down. Um, Part of me coming down, I spoke to some of the kids that were touring the facility. Somewhat of a scared straight program, but not fully. I talked to them about how important it was to make good choices, how the choices I made in my life are the reason I'm here where I am. And so I looked at the jail. I walked through it. The jail's decrepit. I know a lot of people see the price tag for renovations and their mind blows up. But I would encourage anyone who has a problem with that price tag to tour that facility. Seriously, just tour it, right? And it's important because we hear so much about back the blue, support law enforcement, but in the places where law enforcement truly need to be supported, there is no support, right? In the jails where you have doors that aren't closing right, where you've got the ceiling falling apart, like these are a problem. And not only that, from the very beginning, from the very beginning that this jail was created, right? It was overpopulated. It's still overpopulated. So now we're talking about arresting uh, people who work for a newspaper agency for putting a newspaper on somebody's doorstep. Where are you going to put them? The jail is already overcrowded. And so when we start having these conversations, right, like not only is this a violation of our First Amendment rights, but our criminal justice system isn't resource funded in a way where if you wanted to make this a law enforcement issue, it could be dealt with, which I think in and of itself is ridiculous to criminalize someone for saying, here, here's a newspaper, here's the up-to-date information about what's going on in your community. Mike Pachinik is a really, really good friend of mine. I really appreciated him standing above the fray and being open and honest with the city council, with news media outlets about what's really going on, what's truly at stake. I think it's incumbent on us to be against hate in all forms, right? There's no reason, right? From LGBTQIA plus to Black lives to women to our Jewish friends and family, our Palestinian friends and family. Listen, we can't. There's no place for hate here in America. We are hands down one of the most diverse countries in this world, and we have to do a better job of learning to get along. Learning to get along. And when people say things that don't make us comfortable, the solution isn't to criminalize their rhetoric. The solution is how do we bring all sides to the table to talk about what our community looks like going forward? Because that's the conversation that we need to be having is what does our community look like long term? My daughter's 7 years old. I'm not going anywhere. There are a lot of young families like me in this area that aren't going anywhere. It's time for us to have a conversation about what these things look like because there are things that are happening in this city that are offensive. I'm getting emails from everywhere about one of the city's premier events, the Sundown Social. Folks are like, do they lack context about what the term sundown meant? I'm not here to get into the weeds of that. What I'm here to say is there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And it's incumbent on the leaders in this community to stand up. We had the largest fentanyl drug bust in Georgia history that took place in Sandy Springs. When I was down at the Fulton County Jail and we were in that maximum security cell and we're talking to gang members who have been convicted. We're talking to men who've been convicted of murder, and they're talking about the loopholes and the crevices, not just in Atlanta and South Fulton, but throughout the metro. There's a reason why we had those drugs in our community. There's a breakdown in leadership, and it's incumbent on those of good conscience and good faith to step up because what's needed right now, whether they want to admit to it or not, is love-centered leadership that is rooted in service. The reason why they're coming after these free speech amendments is because we don't have elected officials in city council right now who have the courage and gumption to sit down with different groups within their community. And so they're choosing silence over service. And we can't do that. We can't. We can't. It's time for us to put leadership in the center that's going to value everybody, who's going to look at our seniors, who's going to look at our singles, who's going to look at our young family, our young students, and say, what does this community need? I sat down and I went to our Sandy Springs education force, and I'm going to get back to this in just a second. And folks were like, "Man, you said 50% of the public students are homeless." I said, "I never said 50%." "Yes, you did." I said, "No, you can go back and look at all my material. I didn't say 50%. I said we're looking at as high as 30%." And I'll stand on that. I'll stand on that. I'm not really interested in what the district has on paper because I know it's not accurate. I'm in the schools. I'm mentoring kids. I'm talking to them about how their holidays went. I was talking to one young man. I said, young boy, and I said, "Hey, how was your Thanksgiving?" He said, "We spent the time hotel hopping." That's happening in Sandy Springs. And so, you know, the pushback that I'm getting on that is ridiculous because what it shows is the entire community is not being centered right now. And when the entire community is not being centered, that's when the historic drug bust happens. That's when there's openings for gangs to come in the community because we're not dealing with the hurt that the people in our community are dealing with. There's no reason why housing is the way it is, why rent is the way it is. The Supreme Court, I've shared those. You can go back and look at previous videos, has already ruled on that, and the mayor and city council's role in that. Whether they want to disagree with me or not, I don't care what the Georgia state legislature said because the Supreme Court trumps all that, which is why, 47 is seeing that a lot of his agenda is getting rolled back. Why? Because you can't do it. And so we need elected officials who are going to center justice and fairness. You can't allow predatory development to just run rampant. And I remember when I was working in the Fulton County DA's office, and one of the prosecutors I was talking to said, you don't get this level of gentrification without crimes being broken. There are crimes happening, but there's a lack of courage that is stepping up and saying, what you're doing is wrong. You're creating hopelessness and homelessness in our community, and we've got to deal with that. That's what this is about for me. And so I don't want anybody trying to mince my words, this, that, or the other. I'm going to be very clear on what I'm standing on. Because when I sat there at the education meeting and they said, "You know what?" They said, "But you're saying these things, Dante, and it's going to make some of our wealthier families not want to go to school, want to go into the public school system." Listen, man, I don't care what people's perceptions are. I care about fixing the problem. And the problem is we got a lot of people who care about the optics of this thing instead of optimizing like our system so that they become effective for all of us. That's what matters to me. But I'm going to get back to this, right? Because the reason that these ordinances is an issue, I don't know if you've had a chance to really dive into Appen Media, but Appen Media is the one that's really exposing what's going on in City Hall. And like, it makes me feel good because now they don't have to say Dante said it, right? I'm not giving these people anything. I'm pretty sure the same employees that work within the city that are leaking me information are leaking this newspaper information. And they're telling us that the house is on fire. I don't have to tell you the house is on fire. The fact that we have not one, but two city council folks running against the incumbent lets you know it's bad and that change is needed. My issue with the two city council folks is y'all were there with him for over a decade. And he'll tell you in some of these articles, they approved all the decisions that he made. They stood behind him. And so I really don't care about, oh man, Dante, we can agree change is needed. Yeah, change is needed, but you've been part of the problem. And that's my issue, right? We need people of good conscience and good faith that when they see something, will say something. And these folks didn't say anything until it was time to get votes. And that's my problem with this. Because if you truly cared about the people, you would have said something a long time ago. If you truly cared about the people, you wouldn't have had Dante sitting over there on the island yelling and screaming about the problems in this city. But no, they didn't. They stayed quiet. And that's my issue with all of this, right? And now the city's attempting to quiet the media is actually looking into them, right? Sandy Springs and many of the other suburbs, right? Because I don't want to isolate Sandy Springs in this, but they've been beneficiaries of Atlanta being big and having all the eyes on Atlanta, right? You'll see all the news stations, WSB, Mark Winnie, they're in the weeds of the Atlanta politics because that's the shiny object on the hilltop, right? But no, we've got a lot going on here in Sandy Springs, and that's why I appreciate, and I'm gonna say this, right, as a former journalist, I appreciate the media really digging into what's going on in this city. Again, right? I know I did some yelling and telling people what was going on. This time it ain't me. It's the media laying out everything that's happening. So I wanna finish reading because this is interesting, right? And so it says Appen Media delivers the Sandy Springs Crier in the early morning hours to avoid traffic and to make sure the weekly paper is on driveways when readers wake up. Some delivery drivers also have day jobs. So again, what they're talking about is arresting these delivery drivers. That's what they're talking about. And that's why I brought up the whole jail stuff, right? It says now the paper is delivered after 7 a.m. to comply with the new law. It says the ordinance passed within days of the city's loss in court. So I'm telling y'all, this listen, you can't make this stuff up. You can't make it up. You can't make it up. I'm not gonna be petty right now. But it says Appen Media is locked in a bitter lawsuit with Sandy Springs over its refusal to provide officer narratives and police incident reports. Every single city gives us these records, with the exception of Sandy Springs. Appen Media says, y'all. So you hear that, right? Every city, every city, every city complies. Every city complies with the open records law, except Sandy Springs. Every city complies, except for Sandy Springs. So I know folks want to say, "Man, Dante, you're going hard, you're going hard, you're going hard." Listen, as somebody that's worked as a journalist, as somebody that's worked in government, I'm looking at these folks and I'm appalled. I'm appalled because this relationship and again, if y'all go back and look at the piece that I did on the task force, the 21st century policing task force, the police chiefs, the therapists, all these people that Obama put on this committee to deal with the issue of policing prior to George Floyd, right? They saw the tension building. They were working to deal with it, right? And we have actively people standing in the way that don't want to fix things. They don't want things to be better. They'll tell you Dante's a progressive, all this, yada. I am progressive. I'm thinking outside the box. I've always been a person that has thought outside the box. Why do we do it this way instead of this way, right? It's important for us to be able to think about how to find solutions differently. We got a lot of people who are in city council right now across this nation who are doing something because that's the way it's always been done. There are a lot of companies that um, were started here in the United States of America that are no longer in existence because they couldn't become progressive in their thinking. They couldn't find new ways of reaching people, right? The progressive companies are continuing to grow, right? Let's just be honest about what's necessary and what's needed. That's all I want in this, right? Let's just be honest. But let me get back to this. It says Sandy Springs won a dismissal of the case in its early stages, but Appen Media appealed. The Georgia Court of Appeals reversed that dismissal in March and sent it back to the lower courts. Right? Mm. Within days of the city's loss in the appeals court, the Sandy Springs City Council passed a new ordinance limiting the newspaper's delivery hours. This ain't an accident, y'all. It's not an accident. It's not an accident. I'm just connect the dots, connect the dots. And so Lee has not replied to a request for comment from Atlanta News First Investigates. He ain't gonna respond. That's their MO. They don't respond. They struggle, right? And I don't want to say they never respond because then we'll actually get a response from them and they'll bring up something from 20 years ago when they responded, right? But they struggle to respond. And that's a problem because our relationship with the government only works through transparency, accountability, and honesty. As soon as you start this looking for gray areas and operating in gray spaces, that's when you lose the trust of the people. The city's leadership has lost the trust of the people, period. That's a fact. That's a fact. And so we got to get back to having real conversations about what's necessary and what's needed so that we can make an effective impact. So it says during the April 1st meeting, city councilors discovered the new laws would also apply to their campaign efforts. Didn't I say that in a couple videos ago? Then woo. I'm like, come on, man, it ain't that hard. Just read what's written. They banned soliciting or canvassing of any kind between 9 a.m. and 7 a.m., along with 8 foot buffer zone rule for free speech. Y'all, this is, I'm telling you, whoever sues on this is gonna have a field day. I'm just being honest. I already took the city to court about the signs in my yard when they have a city ordinance that clearly violates my First Amendment rights. And I'll be honest, I did have every Democrat that was running statewide sign in my front yard, and they told me I could only have 2 up to take it down, but that's a violation of my First Amendment rights. And so I picked all the signs up. I bought a huge board from Home Depot, and I put all the signs on that board, and I created a little billboard in my front yard. And a lot of folks will say that's petty, and it probably was. But if I'm going to pay taxes in this city, if I have First Amendment rights in this country, like you don't get to violate those rights because my speech makes you uncomfortable. I didn't threaten anybody. I didn't threaten harm. I didn't threaten any of that, right? But they were uncomfortable with seeing those slate of candidates up there. And so and I say they were uncomfortable because they passed 4 or 5 houses that had MAGA everything up to get to my house. And their excuse was, well, nobody reported them. Everybody only reported you. And so if this is the game you're going to play, we're going to stand on all of our rights, period. Um, but it's interesting, right, that this is going on. And what's also interesting, everybody's talking about these are nonpartisan races. Listen, nothing is nonpartisan. Nothing. Everybody has an opinion. They'll always have an opinion. So let's stop with this is nonpartisan. No, it's just a way to silence a certain group of voters. And here's why. Because, and I'm going to scroll down, 2 days after the ordinances were passed in Sandy Springs, the Georgia General Assembly inserted language into a bill that would have restricted public access to police records statewide. You hear that? They took this language and they put it into a statewide bill. Now, this is a problem, and I want to explain what the problem is, right? We just passed along tort reform, right? Businesses, doctors were all in support of tort reform, right? Because they said it's going to limit how much their insurance rates increase by. That's not 100% accurate. I understand where it came from, but that's not 100% accurate, right? The reality is it's really going to impact people who are the victims of negligence. And I'm just, whether it's somebody on their cell phone that's driving that hits you, injures you, you never know how much treatment somebody's going to need. You never know what it's going to cost to repair damage. And let's be honest, these radical lawsuits, quote unquote radical, that they're talking about, that's not an everyday lawsuit. Those are once in a blue moon lawsuits. The problem is they stick in our minds, right? Because they're so big and they're so outside of the ordinary. That's just being honest, right? So now you have something that limits how much an attorney can sue somebody who's hurt their client for, right? And what we've been seeing, right, is this growth of lawyers holding cities accountable on this police issue by suing them. Now you're saying that we're going to restrict the access to this, right? And again, I know in court things will come out differently, yada, 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 yada. But again, George Floyd's case came to light because it hit the public, right? Trayvon Martin's case came to light because facts hit the public. And so we really have to think about the impact of these things and what it does. It goes on to say the new measure was added to a bill that already passed the Georgia Senate, it would have made all crime records exempt from Georgia Open Records Act until every legal appeal is exhausted. Y'all, it's a lot of appeals. I'm just saying, all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, while limiting release of police narratives and incident reports. This is problematic on a lot of levels, y'all. And this is why strong leadership is important. It says the measure was advanced in the final hours of the legislative session without a committee hearing or public comment. So you hear them do all these spills. Y'all want to talk about gun safety? Let's hold a committee hearing, right? Y'all want to talk about women's rights? Let's hold a committee hearing. They'll put all these other things in a committee hearing and they'll run citizens around the gamut. But something like this, right, where we're looking at transparency, accountability, and honesty, they're pushing through. That's a problem. It says it was a direct response to the appellate court's ruling in the case, Appen said. And that's Carl Appen, who's the director there, and I believe he's also the owner of Appen Media. It says the new language was removed from the bill before a vote in the Georgia House after several outlets, including the Atlanta News First Investigates, questioned the measure, and Governor Brian Kemp responded publicly that he did not support it, right? Again, this is why accountability, transparency, and honesty, because if Carl Appen hadn't sounded the alarm on this and waved the red flag and the other news outlets didn't jump on this thing, where would that have left us? We got to really understand where we are in this time period, right? The Constitution is a contract between the citizens of this nation and the government. The government has an obligation to that contract, and so do the citizens. Right now, what we're seeing is elected officials who are actively in violation of that contract. On the U.S. Constitution side, the state Constitution side, and here in Sandy Springs on the charter side. And that's what they call the Constitution of Sandy Springs, the Sandy Springs City Charter. And so it's going to be on us. We've got a big election coming up on November 5th. Yes, I'm running to be the next mayor in this city. Yes, folks have a lot of questions. I want y'all to ask these questions. And I don't want us to have a debate. I don't want us to have a debate, not because I'm against debates, right? But I don't want to argue about the issue. What I want to see is citizens from around Sandy Springs bring to the table their most important problems, their issues with the city. Lay them out, right, in a Q&A session and let the candidates answer them. Let the city see how we think. Let the city see our approach to problem solving. Because a lot of the issues that we face right now could be dealt with if people saw how we approach problem solving. Who's going to think outside the box? Who's going to say, well, we've always done it this way. Let's continue to do it that way. Ask the candidates these questions. When they knock on your door, ask them, why now? Why now? Why are you here now? Be honest with them, right? Be honest. We have to have these honest conversations. This is not the wild, wild west. This is a civilized community. This is a community where we have to be able to have conversations. We got to have conversations, right? I had a conversation with one of the candidates about some of the stuff he said online. Say what you want to, but let's get to the root of these issues, right? And he tried to, do the gray area stuff. I don't do gray area. I'm a straight shooter, right? Everybody knows that. You got a question, I'm gonna give you a direct answer. I gave everybody direct answers. When they asked me, you're saying this thing about the homeless rate, why? Yada, 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 yada. It's gonna make some of our wealthier parents not go to school in our public schools. Do you see the impact of your words? And I'm like, impact? I'm trying to figure out what's the impact of us fixing the actual problem. Let's look at that. So we just got to be honest about what's going on. So I didn't want to drag this on, but it's important for us to continue to have these conversations. It's important for us to sound the alarm when things are going wrong. And I wasn't sure how effective these lives were until I seen the seniors coming up. and telling me they had been listening. They appreciated me going through the budget, all these things that I thought was boring and like yada yada. But honestly, it is boring. But I feel like it's important for us to know what's the word I'm looking for. It's important for people to know what the job descriptions are of the mayor, the city councils, and when they're not doing their jobs right. These things are important. So listen, I got to get back to dialing for dollars. You know, I got a big deadline, fundraising deadline coming up next week, Wednesday. Listen, man, if y'all love me, if you support the work that I'm doing, man, drop 5, 10, $20, you know, a dollar, whatever works within your budget. Drop it in there. You know, you can definitely use the support. The video that you saw in the intro is a local artist. I'm going to be working with him to make a video. He just told me like he was just really inspired by the work that I've done in the community, and I'm inspired by the video he made. You know, gotta fight harder, harder. I was like, oh, you know, it was. So I got a little excited. That's all. But it's just important, right? Super important for us to be having these conversations, and important for us to continue to keep bringing the community along. So I just want to thank y'all so much for tuning in. Thank y'all for riding with your boy. It's 10:20 in the morning, and we got a good number of y'all on. So thank y'all for jumping in, for chiming in, and yeah, I will talk to y'all later. Peace.
I'm a father, I'm a husband, and I want my daughter to know that she can grow up and that her life is going to be valuable just like everybody else that grew up with.
We gotta work harder, smarter, harder. We gotta work